Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mike Davis. I am a member of the Board of Public Works here in the great city of Los Angeles and chair of the African American Heritage Month program. Today, it is a privilege for us to present with Mayor Eric Garcetti and also our Author Study Club an evening with African American authors. As many of you have seen in the advertisement, we have 4 authors. And I have to tell you, one of our authors, I think, is caught in the snow in Washington, D.C., Sandra Evers Manley. But we weren't able to get her by phone. I know it was a difficult time for her to get on the plane earlier in the morning. But we're very pleased to have each of our authors that are also here. To my far left, Gary Phillips, who has written, among many other works, the Obama Inheritance Anthology. Also, to his right and my left, Judith C. Owens Lalude. I hope I pronounced that right. The Long Walk, Slavery to Freedom. And to my immediate right, Dr. Karen Stanford, who's a professor at California State University Northridge and author of African Americans in Los Angeles. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the president of our Author Study Club. As you know, our Author Study Club helped to coordinate and start the celebration of African American History Month back in 1949 here in the city of Los Angeles when they were working with then Mayor Bowden. And so many years later, 70 years later, we're still here doing it. So why don't you join me in welcoming the president of our Author Study Club, Ernestine Gordon, for greetings.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And it is indeed a pleasure to be here at the, I believe it's our 4th annual evening with the authors here at the City of Los Angeles. We started planning this program under the leadership of Mike, Commissioner Mike Davis. And so it's really great to have you, the authors here. It's, you know, we're looking forward to asking questions, to getting your books, but it's really important to understand that now in 2019, we can publish books. We can learn to read. Now, the funny thing that that came to my mind when I was coming here, they said blacks didn't know how to read. Well, that's not quite true, because in their own language, they probably did know how to read. It's just that on this continent, they did not know how to read because it was illegal to do it. But now we have the privilege of writing our history. We have the privilege of talking and speaking and getting out and telling our story. So it really is significant for us to always tell our story, to always remember. This year, 2019, is honoring an act that was legislated in 2018. It's called the 400 Years of Commemoration of Perseverance. So it's talking about not only black authors, people who are able to publish their books, the struggles that we've gone through, but it's the perseverance through all of these 400 years of to the point where we even have elected a black president in President Obama. So we continue to move, and so it's just so wonderful to have these authors here, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say regarding your topics. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Ernestine. And it is also a privilege to introduce for greetings a young man who is working as the deputy for Mayor Eric Garcetti in his community relations office, and we're very proud to have him as a part of our administration, David Price from the office of Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Good evening, everyone. I bring you greetings on behalf of Mayor Eric Garcetti and the entire city of Los Angeles. We're so excited to be able to partner with our Author Study Club, with Commissioner Mike Davis and the African American History Month Committee to produce a series of events and activities and programs that celebrate African American history in Los Angeles, California, and indeed the country of the United States of America. Maya Angelou once said, "The idea is to write so that people hear it and it slides through the brain and goes straight to the heart." The authors whom we have today, they do just that. They slide through the brain and go straight through the heart. And so we're so grateful to have them in our midst today to hear their words and their thoughts about the works that they have produced. And so we thank you and we appreciate you for being here, and we look forward to a robust conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. David is among those millennials to whom we can look for great leadership. He's a Harvard graduate, and we are expecting great things for him in the future. We were able to honor many individuals for our opening ceremonies, and among them, our living legend this year was B.B. Winans, who is from the gospel great family, the Winans family. And in addition to that, we were able to honor Ken Brazil, the first African-American presiding judge of Los Angeles Superior Court, which you know started back in the 1800s. And also we were able to, in business, recognize Ken McNeely, who's the first African-American to serve as regional president of AT&T West. And he has jurisdiction over 19 states of that telecommunications company. And finally, in education, we were able to honor Dr. Wanda Austin, who was or is the first woman and African-American to lead University of Southern California. So these were the honorees at the opening ceremonies of the 2019 African American Heritage Month celebration here in the great city of Los Angeles. We have, since we have met, lost some great giants in music, and we have paid recognition to some of them, certainly Nancy Wilson, James Ingram, and also Aretha Franklin. And today, as we always do in this celebration of authors, we do share a tribute to musicians, and tonight is no exception. We are doing a tribute tonight from one of our artists here who has been very active locally in performing as a singer, better known as Madam D, and you may have seen her at many musical establishments. But she is giving a tribute to none other than Aretha Franklin today, as we reflect back upon African American history and the work over the years that Aretha Franklin did. As you know, she was born in right after World War II, right on the dawning of it, quite actually, in 1942 in Memphis, Tennessee. And she was the daughter of C.L. Franklin, who was one of the great pastors, the first African American pastor really to make an album of his sermons. But I think what was unique about Aretha was the fact that she was a child prodigy who could play the piano even at the age of 8, 9, and 10. She was playing and she was touring with her father as he would preach in various places. She would sing right before he had an opportunity to preach. She, at the age of 18 years old, became an artist who was signed with Columbia Records in New York. But it was after then, her service there, that she went to Atlantic Records, where she really became famous in the 1960s, 66 to be exact. And during this period of time, she made big hits that you all remember, from Respect to Natural Woman. But I think what is really unique about Aretha, many people don't realize. During the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a very close friend to Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha's father, during the time of the Civil Rights Movement, there were lawsuits that took place that had a lot to do with the Montgomery bus boycott. And during that period of time, it cost a lot financially to the Civil Rights Movement. And it was Aretha Franklin and Harry Belafonte, who did an 11-city tour, that financially put in the hands of the civil rights movement the money not only that they needed to get out of legal trouble, but then some to continue the work of the civil rights movement. And then additionally, Aretha also financially helped. Howard University had a financial problem in the 60s as well. And Aretha Franklin did a concert to bail Howard University out of financial trouble. Jokingly, Aretha met the president of Howard University a few years back, and he reminded her that she had bailed them out back in the day, and Aretha said to him fondly, "Yes, but you guys never gave me an honorary doctorate." But when we look at the work that she did, it is not only the music of having attained 18 Grammys that mattered, but even up until a couple of years ago, Aretha quietly and secretly bought $40,000 worth of water for the people in Flint, Michigan, because of the problem that happened there, and she didn't necessarily want anyone to know. So as we reflect back upon the contributions that Aretha Franklin made to the world, let us not be forgetful about the contribution she made to society and how she reinvested back into society for the better. And so today, here to play a tribute to Aretha Franklin is none other than Madam D. My pleasure to talk about the books that will be featured this evening and to talk to each of our authors. And I want to start off and ask the authors to briefly just discuss some of the background and give a brief introduction to the experiences they've had prior to writing their books. so that our audience can get a clear indication of what road led you to writing your books. And we'll start to my far left with Gary Phillips.
Really, you're gonna start with the
just a brief. have you always written books? Or?
Yeah, I've always written books, and I've always been around books. My mom was a librarian for the city of LA.
I see. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Very good. We can give a hand to that. Okay, and what about you, Judith Owens Lalude? Lalude.
Yes. That's a Nigerian name, and
Okay.
you can hear the influence of the Portuguese there.
I see.
Yes. This was actually the first book that I ever wrote, but it started out to be about a 350-word poem. And I let a school librarian read it, and she says, oh, and this is for children, oh, that was good, but it can't end on a sad note for children. So then, as I began to answer the questions, it began to grow.
Have you always been a writer, or have you had
Actually,
experiences differently?
no. I didn't grow up with that wealth of books and grow up writing. I married, I had 2 sons, and I didn't have time to even talk with myself. But what I would do to get them to go to bed, I said, oh, I tell you what, I'll tell you a story if you go to bed. And they would run and jump into bed, and I said, hot damn, I got this made.
So you're a great storyteller.
Well, yes, and when the older one was about 9 years old, he said, Mommy, you should write your own books. And I just started shaking. Another job.
Very good. Dr. Stanford, what about you in terms of work that you've done prior to writing the book? Have you always been a writer?
I have. I've always been a writer. And let me just say that I am in a love affair with books. I'm in a love affair with great nonfiction books. When I was young, I always felt that there was a world outside of my community and outside of my home that I wanted to connect with. And the one way I could do that was to read.
Wow.
So, and I think because I read, I was able to write, which, as you know, they go hand in hand. And I had just the most wonderful elementary school teacher who encouraged me to write little essays. I went on to junior high school. I had a wonderful English teacher who encouraged me to write. And my love for reading and writing just grew.
Wow. So when we think about the work that we are featuring today for each of you as authors, what was it specifically that motivated you to write this piece? For you, for example, Gary, you wrote about the Obama inheritance.
Well, in particular, this is an anthology that I edited. I have a story in it, but I also have several other writers in it, including the erstwhile Walter Mosley. And the impetus, of course, was as Obama was leaving office and as we were going into the next presidential elections then, I wanted to sort of stand on its head all the insane, crazy theories that had sprung up about Obama. And I told each writer, well, you can pick any one of the nut conspiracy ideas, but have fun with it. Turn it on its head to sort of show, in a satirical way, how nuts it is, but also to hopefully to entertain the readers. So in that regard, that's how the anthology came together. And I've edited and several other anthologies. I've also, of course, written several novels and published a lot of short stories. But this is actually one of my most both entertaining projects, and I thought a project that I think would sort of stand the test of time.
Great. And Judith Lalude, you have written about but slavery to freedom. It's the long walk, slavery to freedom. And what inspired you specifically to talk about this experience?
Well, I think me, like many people, kind of paused when Roots was shown. And we started to think back about our ancestors more openly. And my family, I can speak for the many black families in Kentucky, slavery wasn't one of the things that they wanted to talk about. And I can remember when I was just trying to ask who owned our family, where did we come from, and what have you. Well, even though my hair was pretty much gray, I was the kid that raised the carpet and was sweeping out the dust. And my aunt told me, she said, we were never slaves. Aunt Mary, our people were the ones that stood on the west coast of Africa and thumbed a ride. But I refused to give up. And I got very, very little information. But I started researching anyway, what little bit I knew. And fortunately, I knew the city where my family was from, the county, but it wasn't the county they were enslaved with. But I wouldn't give up. And in researching for my family and slavery in north central Kentucky, I said, you know, what we knew about my family in Spencer County, they weren't really abused like we know of some slaves, many, many slaves. So that didn't a good story make. But what did make was the research I did, and what I found was happening to the Africans and the African Americans in north central Kentucky. And I said, this is a story that needs to be told. So I always tell people, yes, this is a fictional novel, but you will recognize the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Stanford, you wrote about African Americans in Los Angeles. Tell us what motivated you to pick that topic.
Well, this one is quite interesting for me. I'm a political scientist, and political scientists are not known for using photos in their work. So this was the first time that I actually worked with photos. But I did it because my students are so visually oriented, and I wanted to give them a sense of local history. In my classes on social movements, my students would consider what happened in the South significant, but not what happened in Los Angeles. And I realized that they really didn't know the history, the rich history of African Americans in Los Angeles. So I called Arcadia Press and said, listen, I need a book, because Arcadia Press publishes local history books. And I said, listen, I need a book on African Americans in Los Angeles, and I don't see it in your website. On your website, and they said, you know what, we've been trying to get someone to do that book for years. So we decided that I would do it.
Very good.
And so that's where the book comes from.
Very good. When we look at your book, and certainly I've had an opportunity to peruse some of the great work that you have done, and some of the pictures I think are so valuable to our knowledge about life of African Americans in Los Angeles in earlier times. What do you think the message people will get when they look at and read your book? What do you think the overwhelming message is in your work on African Americans in LA?
You know what, I think and I hope that people walk away with the idea and the truth that there is diversity in the Black community, that our story is not just one of difficult circumstances. It's not just a story of blacks in entertainment, which is what we normally see when blacks in LA are featured, but it's a diverse story. It's a story of black people living and loving and going to school and studying and fishing and graduating and engaging in charity and going to church and taking care of their children. So I want people to recognize the diversity of our community, know that we exist like every other community does outside of those two particular areas, and I hope that they walk away with hope as well. The last image is one of a student graduating from Cal State Northridge.
I think it shows some very rich experiences that African Americans have had and a great quality of life it reflects in some of the pictures. I really love the pictures of earlier times of African Americans hanging out at the beach, whether it's Santa Monica or Venice Beach, and I think that these are great pictures that everybody can appreciate in the stories that you tell about our experiences here in Los Angeles. Mrs. Lalude, Why don't you tell us and share with us the message that you think people will leave with as they get an opportunity to read Slavery to Freedom?
Well, one of the things, there are many, many events in the book, but I think what you will walk away with, especially a woman, we can be quiet and we can suffer, but the strength that we have inside of us is just monumental. And the protagonist was abused, she was sexually abused, but she did not allow that to tamper with her dignity and her desire for freedom. And she sought that freedom very quietly, and she worked to build a means to escape, and she did. And there are two other characters, and I think about them often. They kind of become real to me. No, not kind. They're real to me. And I would write, rewrite, edit, rewrite. I would stop writing. It's a kind of a painful type of writing, but I found myself drawing from the strength of my characters. Wow. Clarissa, who refused to be enslaved, and Lily, who was determined that she would not be kept down. And it goes on, and I thought, well, if I can feel the strength of these women, the readers of my book will certainly have something to gain.
Gary, you talk about the inheritance, the Obama inheritance. When we read the Obama inheritance, what is one of the unavoidable, dominant things that we will leave that work understanding?
Well, I think what people will get from it, Mike, is, as I said, I think they'll be wildly entertained by the variety of stories we have there. And I might mention that, Michelle Obama gets some proper time on the page as well in some of the short stories. And I think what people will take away from it, though, on a somewhat serious note, I suppose, is the use of the sort of over-the-top qualities and satire, but as a way to sort of make a commentary about our times and, in a certain way, I suppose, the political climate that we find ourselves in. But that, in the end, it really is about people working together to overcome those kind of odds that would keep us back, would keep us down. And so I think that's, even though I never told that to any of the writers to be a theme in their work,
sure,
that theme, I think, comes through again and again.
Great. Esselwan Bookstore is here as well for those of you who want to look at some of the work that we're talking about here today. And I want to, before we go to questions, to ask each of you to maybe get a passage that you think kind of reflects something valuable in your book. Professor, you want to, Dr. Karen Stanford, in her book, African Americans in Los Angeles. It's a great book that you must have as a part of your collection. All of these books you must have as a part of your collection. But Professor Stanford, who also teaches at California State University, Northridge, do you have a piece you'd like to share with the audience before we go to questions from the audience?
Well, what I will, gosh, I have the slideshow,
oh,
but
would you like to do that?
no, I don't have to do that. But I will say that on page 55 of the book is a photo of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preaching at Second Baptist Church in 1964. And one of the things that I hope people will walk away with, just as my students, is that people and national leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, Adam Clayton Powell, Rosa Parks, they all came to LA to work with our community. They recognize the significance of our community here. W.B. Du Bois came here. Booker T. Washington came here. So it's really important for us to see ourselves as part of a national history. We're local, but we're also a part of that national story of activism that helped to change this country from one that would discriminate without challenge. We were a part of that, and that's what I want people to know.
Great. And I think that's interesting because if Martin Luther King was at Second Baptist Church in 1964, that was a year before he came back in 1965 at the Watts riots. And we know that after the Watts riots, it really had a real strong message nationally because LA was depicted, as your book suggests, as a place where then Negroes were really better off in Los Angeles. But when we had the Watts riots, it kind of said, well, no, there is some discrimination in Los Angeles too. It's not any different than the other parts of America. So to know that he came here first to observe and to be a part of the culture of what we were doing, but also came back a year later is also very telling, and I'm glad that you revealed that in your book. Mrs. Lalude,
Yes.
why don't you give us a passage that you think reflects something very valuable about your work?
I'd like to read you told me to pick my favorite, so I did.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is where Clarissa has just been auctioned. She's off the block, and she's standing behind the block, and I'm going to read it in first person. I leaned against the rear of the auction block. My small boy squatted at my feet, bundled in the quilt that had been handed down, woman to woman, in my family. Befuddled, I studied the surface of the block, polished by damp feet, marred by shekels, stained with blood, and punctuated with dark bits of flesh. I closed my eyes. Recollections of my family being sold raced through my mind. My man Jake, burdened with age and wore out. My boy Toby, with the butterfly birthmark on the back of his neck, and my twin Gales, Mary and Molly, wrapped together, bounded as one. Grieved, I shifted my focus to Ben Miller. He be my new master. I scared. I standing there. My boy, he's holding on to me tight as he can. And the master come, he shove us towards an oxen cart, push us up in there, throw horse blankets over us. They itchy, they scratch, they smell. I push the quilt down between them blankets and my boy. I pulls him up into my fold. I scared. I hears him holler, hike, hike, to that ox. And we takes off. We's going down that road, but I scared. Didn't know where I'd been, didn't know where I was going. But I know, I scared. I wants to lay this burden down. That road be long and dark. I can see them trees through the moonlight. They be reaching them naked branches over one to the other, like fingers trying to touch. I pull myself down tight. I was scared. I was real scared. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that this is a very interesting piece of work, and certainly it reflects the experience, the African American experience. When we talk about from slavery to freedom, it's kind of the heartbeat of the work of many African Americans. And I think this theme this year, Black Migrations, also reflects our desire to move to places where we are allowed to enjoy the American dream.
I'd like to say one
Yes,
more
ma'am.
thing. I'd like to say that my first-person interpretive program is recognized by the National Underground Network to Freedom because of the research I did for the book. Sure. And you have to fill out an application. So I encourage anyone who's written a historical novel to do that. And it means a lot because I didn't just want to write the book, but I wanted the story to be as real as I could possibly make it. And so it took about a year because it's always, why did the slaves run? why did a slave run? So it had to be documented. Which way did they go? So you have to document everything. But I feel it was really worthwhile.
Absolutely.
And I can use their logo now.
I think we are always running throughout our lives and then again, when we think about black migrations, which is the theme this year, we can look to, again, when we moved from the South to New York and New Jersey. People might say we were running then, but we were looking for freedom. We were looking for the promise of the American dream. And then that was after World War I. After World War II, you find a big influx of African Americans that moved to Los Angeles and rates like never before. And I think when we look at the results of an election of a Tom Bradley, it really was the fruit of the mass numbers of African Americans that moved to Los Angeles in the 40s after World War II. So that this ever black migration was in search of freedom. It was an extension of from slavery to freedom, and we continue to do it every day because now this issue of discrimination is still something for which we still have movement towards change, towards freedom, and again, the dream that we hope America will promise us as it has been made available to others. Gary, you don't have a book with you, but maybe you have something you would like to recite?
Well, nothing I can recite because I can't retain anything because I'm an old man now. But
Okay. Don't worry about it. We've got your book for those.
You're in good
but,
company.
you're right, but I will say this: that in the story that I have in the anthology, it's called "The Black Pimpernel Strikes," and I got the name. The Black Pimpernel actually was the name that Nelson Mandela used when he was underground in apartheid South Africa. So I purposely then used that name for the name of this character who moves in and around a slightly dystopian near future where repressive forces have taken hold, and he's part of the resistance. So that's sort of the basis for how that story came about.
Great. We'll take a couple of questions from the audience, and of course we have books for those who want to get them, and then also we will have our authors to sign books after we have questions from the audience.
Right, and so what you'll see are about 14 slides from the book. I just wanted you to get a feel for the kind of work that was put into this project. And let me just say at the outset that I had a lot of support in this effort. Half of the photos come from the Institute of Arts and Media at Cal State Northridge. It's since been renamed the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center. But this center has about 700,000 photos of African Americans. It is one of the best kept secrets here in Southern California. So the goal was to provide some insight to the public first on just what the center owned, and then of course I was interested in showcasing those images to the local community and other people who were interested. So what I did was I just put together a few of those photos, and I'm happy to share those with you.
Okay.
Let's see if I can work this. So let me just say, here's the cover of the book, and there were about 5 photographers who donated photos to the Institute, and so I use a nice portion of those photos. I also want to say before I get started, just in case I forget, is that Keith Rice, who is the archivist of the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center, is here, and he's probably going to help me with my memory as well.
What beach is that?
Keith, do we know which beach this one is? This photo was shot by Charles Williams. Okay, I thought it was Guy Crowder. But let me just say that what's interesting about this cover is that there was a major debate about whether or not we should put a church on the cover just because of the ubiquity of, the church in Black life, or should we focus on beach culture because we are in Los Angeles. And that, of course, would bring more texture to and richness to the area in which we live. And so we surveyed colleagues, friends, family, my editors, et cetera, and they all decided that we should go with the beach cover. Of course, we don't neglect the black church. There's several images in the book, but so that's how we got to the cover. This is an image of Pio Pico. I'm sure many of you have seen him before. He was a two-time governor of what was Alta, California, and he was considered a mulatto. His heritage was a mixture of African, Native, and Mexican heritage. He was born in 1801. He also served on what was called, I think, the Los Angeles Common Council for 1 year. He built a major hotel in downtown LA. I think it was called the Plaza. And he is a forerunner for us. So in terms of connecting African Americans to the history of the founding of Los Angeles, he does that for us. And of course, I'm sure many of you know this individual who I call one of the great mothers of Black Los Angeles. This is Bridget Biddy Mason. And I was cautioned by a friend of mine not to call her Biddy Mason because her name is Bridget. And that the term Biddy was sort of, keeps her in an era of slavery. And condescending, right. And so this is a photo of her. I may have gotten this one from the Los Angeles Public Library. But she has such a very, very important history, not only because she was courageous enough to fight for her freedom, but she also became very wealthy. She was a philanthropist. She was an entrepreneur. And she's just a great example for us to follow. So I included her in the book as well. And these are some of our newspaper editors and journalists. The first photo, well, actually, the photo to the right, John Nemore, he was the founder of, my understanding is, the first black newspaper. It was called The Owl and later called The Ego. I think this newspaper began in 1879, and he founded it to support black migrants to Los Angeles. And then, after he passes away in 1912, his employee, Charlotta Bass, who was selling subscriptions for him, took over the newspaper and became the editor. And Charlotta Bass is a very important person in Los Angeles history as well. She was a major activist, very involved in the NAACP, but also very involved in the Communist Party as well. And she actually ran for the vice presidency on the Progressive Party ticket. Let me just ask, can I ask, is everyone aware of these individuals?
I've heard of Shaq. Some of them.
Okay. So I'm giving you history, we got a very learned audience here. So here's Frederick Madison Roberts. Right, absolutely. I love his, gosh, it's so hard to research him, though. I am absolutely in search of any information anyone has on Frederick Madison Roberts. He was the first black assemblyman of Los Angeles. I think he was elected in 1918. He ran on a platform of equality, of course. He fought for civil rights and anti-lynching legislation. And Augustus Hawkins defeated him in let's just say in the 1930s. He was a Republican because at that time, the Republican Party was the party of equality. What's also interesting about Frederick Madison Roberts is that he is a descendant of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, and through DNA tests that has been proven at this stage. So his mother was the granddaughter of Sally Hemings. Her father was the son of Sally Hemings. So there is a direct linkage again to national history, actually someone who founded this country. And those connections are very important for our children to understand. Oh, there was another picture. Gosh, I love this photo. This is a picture of the NAACP Executive Board in 1923, and I just love the hats. Frederick Roberts is in the back,
I see him.
and his wife has on a beautiful hat. She's standing in front of him. Pat. What I wanted to showcase here today was also the significance of seeing joy on the faces of Black children in Los Angeles. So I love this photo. This is a youth choir from Hamilton Methodist Church. And these wonderful children have on these bows. I wonder if our kids would wear today. I could just see young Black males in these bows. So I wanted to showcase just how happy they were. And here's another photo of young children. I think these photos were taken during the 1950s, and it would be so nice if we could identify some of these individuals. I think the teacher here, her name is Jackie Tatum, but these are children just learning and smiling and enjoying the activity, and this is a photo of a teacher who is enjoying the experience as well. This is a photo of Central Avenue and the Dunbar Hotel. There's a sign out that says Congo, and I think that was called the Congo Room. So we'll move on to another photo of Central Avenue. This was a gala that was hosted by a social club, and it was a charity event. And what they did was they decorated hats, they raised money, and they gave that funding to charity. So I love the hats of the couple on the top of one hat. And I think that's a car on the second hat. And there's the photo that I discussed of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at Second Baptist Church in 1964. Here's a photo of Black activism also in the 1960s. This was the NAACP campaign, Don't Buy Where You Can't Work. I'm not sure if you are aware of the major event that occurred in 1969. The Southern California of the Black Panther Party was founded here in Los Angeles in 1968. It was the second branch of the Black Panther Party. And in 1969, 5 days after Fred Hampton was killed in Chicago, the LAPD and SWAT invaded the Black Panther Party headquarters on 41st and Central. And there were about 300 members of LAPD and SWAT out front, and 13 members of the Black Panther Party inside the house. And the Panther Party shot back. So there was about a 5-hour shootout between the LAPD and the Black Panther Party, but no one died. So those members of the Black Panther Party survived, and they lived to tell their story. 2 years after the shootout, all of them were found not guilty of conspiracy to commit murder against the police officers because the charges were weighed against them even though they were in the house. So this is a photo of the outside of the headquarters the next day.
There's a documentary about this, too.
Right, there is a documentary called 41st and Central. And what you see is a picture of Huey Newton and an advertisement of the free breakfast program of the party. And there are additional photos of this incident in the book. I love this photo as well, too. This is Buddy Collette and Groucho Marx performing on Groucho Marx TV show, and it just shows the attempts by Black and white artists to work together during a period of segregation. And here's a picture of Mayor Tom Bradley kind of jabbing our heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali. And I started to showcase the photo of Tom Bradley running for office. Obviously, there are photos in the book of Tom Bradley during the Olympics and running for office, but I thought this would be a nice photo to see him as just a real human being having fun with a friend. Here's a photo of Michael Jackson and Diana Ross, who was his mentor when he was very young. And if you look in the background, you see other members of the Jackson Five. This is a photo that comes out of the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center. And the final photo is a photo of three queens: Maxine Waters, Rosa Parks, and Oprah Winfrey. I think this photo was taken in 1979 at the Black Women's Forum event, and it was to honor Rosa Parks. And that's it. So thank you.
Those are some great pictures. Great pictures that certainly reflect that Los Angeles is still a great place to live. And I wanted to ask for those who have questions, please to come to the microphone if you have any questions of our authors.
Good evening. Thank you for those presentations. I just had a comment about the Pico picture. Sometime in the 90s, the LA Times, either page 2 or 3, part 1, they had that picture of Pio Pico, and the title was Pio Pico Has Failed. I don't know what I did with my copy, but they said he was ugly in the article, and it was an article about his looks, LA Times. Sometimes in the 90s. I just remember it was in the 90s. So that might be something else that you can bring to your students, and certainly the racism toward anyone who is of African descent and who's Latino. That's an important piece. And then for Judith, I've known Judith a long time and was intrigued with her story. She told me about it in around 2001, and she read it over the phone because she lived in Kentucky, and I started crying. And her essay of about 300 words turned into this book. I've used it in my class for students. And the piece she read was the opening paragraph, which is my favorite. And the part where you talk about the flesh on the auction block always got to us. But I would like for you to discuss the part about the relationship with Margaret Gardner crossing the Ohio River and your quilt. And there's a quilt that is stranded through the book, and Judith actually made a quilt to parallel the book. Thank you.
Yes, the quilt was a guide for the family on how, when you escape, which direction to go, how to cross the river, follow the stars, and keep moving north. And this quilt was handed down woman to woman, generation to generation, and it ended up with Clarissa. She was raised by her grandmother because her mother, who was a bit outspoken, was sold away from her. And then the grandmother was sold away. But under the straw in the bed, she found this quilt, and she kept it, but never showed it to her children because she knew that if they had a slip of the lip, that they had any knowledge about anything on that quilt or that quilt, then they would be subject to abuse and death. And not until she and George Henry were seeking freedom and they were on the trail did she turn that quilt over, open it up, and talk to him about how it was handed down and what it meant to the family. Was there another part to that question? Oh, yes. What was interesting in doing some research, I lived in Louisville. Kentucky is a border state. The Ohio River flows across the entire northern border of Kentucky, and it does freeze over. So I was happy I found that it was frozen in 1838, but my great-grandfather was born in 1850, and this story is centered around the era of my family, and I was just troubled by it. And I was just at Fisk at their library doing some research and came across the story. I said, oh, yes, she crossed the river in 1856. Perfect. So then I knew that they could cross that river, and that river would be frozen at that time. So I was able to sync that, and I was a happy duck in water.
Great, great.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, good. We have one. Good that we have one.
Everyone. I'd like to first of all thank all the authors and everyone associated with this event. My question is to Dr. Stanford. You wrote a book to engage your students, but I find that my younger children, as you said, are more visual. So how do you get them engaged?
You know what, you do have to engage them with the visuals, and then you can continue the discussion. You know what I find that really works for me as well? You've got to embrace technology. As difficult as it has been for me to embrace it, you've got to embrace technology. There's so many wonderful clips on YouTube that, you know, will discuss most subjects, and so I engage them with a clip, and then we get to discuss the reading. I engage them with photos, and then we get to discuss the reading. So it's really about accepting where they are and working with them, using the technology that they understand.
Thank you.
So at this point, we do have our president of the Cultural Affairs Commission, who happens to be an African-American woman. We do have 50% of the mayor's appointees are women, so we do have gender diversity as well as racial diversity in our appointments. So it is my privilege to have closing remarks. I don't know if Madam D has another Aretha Franklin song to close us out on, but we certainly have.
That would make everybody leave if I said.
No, but we have our president of the City of Los Angeles Cultural Affairs Commission, Charmaine Jefferson.
Good evening. I come here with closing remarks first to thank all of the authors who were here today. Karen and I end up more connected than we ever think about because the work that she does is also connected to the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center at CSUN, and I am a executive consultant to the Tom and Ethel Bradley Foundation. So, hello. And there's Keith, who needs to raise his hand, because without him, those photographs and so many others would not be there. And it allows me to just add to this moment of what would be the closing remarks to say, I urge you to go on the sites that have images of African American people, whether they're on the public library or particularly at CSUN, and see what it says about that photo. And there are some of you in here who are a little younger than me, but you still have information. And if you see that there is information that needs to be had, because you know what that photo is, you know what they were doing, you know who was in it, send information to the place that has that photo. It is extraordinarily important, because without it, not only can they not put their books together, but what ends up happening is by the time we're through, it's only the same 10 black people, and it's as if somehow or another all the rest of you, and I mean all of you, who have made contributions, it never gets noticed. Wonderful people like Ian Fox and the photographers, the African-American photojournalists who are in the CSUN collection and elsewhere, actually document our story. When you go to look yourself up, don't worry that you looked in the Times and you didn't see anything. Remember, they didn't want to write about us. They weren't trying to keep our history, so where do you think it is? It's in the Eagle and the Liberator. It's even in the Chicago Defender when you're here in Los Angeles. It's in the Sentinel. It's in our weekly today. It's in the smaller newspapers that are still yet to be digitized. So your voice can be powerful when it turns to the library and it says, I'm sorry, I can only see the Eagle on microfiche. That's not good enough. Because that also means that our seniors who are first voice people can actually sit at home, call up the picture, and send information back without going to the library, etc. And guess who has the information? Our mamas and daddies who are not yet passed, those of us like me who they just made me get a Medicare card, and everybody else below us. So you are the linchpin, just as these authors have been, to telling the story, and our Authors Study Club urges you over and over and over again to be that linchpin. And I finally share, because I am on the Cultural Affairs Commission, two things. One, and I'm sure that Jan already brought this up, as did others, this month's Journal of Negro History is about migration. That's what the theme was. So there are a lot of lectures in here. Carter G. Woodson said, if we do not know our history, if we're not telling our history, if we're not keeping our history, it just makes us extinct. And if we're not birthing enough babies, then we better be telling our story so that people don't forget it. And the other reason so they don't forget it is because what happens is that now that they have bought onto what the new bandwagon is, which I'm happy about, hurry now, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're included, they've got your photograph, and they forget to say that it came, who it came from. So now it's in their collection with no information that goes with it. Lastly, the Cultural Affairs Commission puts out every year, in association with the extraordinary work that Mike Davis does and the All Authors Study Club, the African American Heritage Month. This was started because of black people. Now it exists for every one of the affinity groups, racial groups, cultural groups, you name it. If you don't have a copy, get one. It actually really does show you some of the incredible work that's going on, the great activities, including all the way into the year. And I leave you with the following. On the back page, the Broad Museum is doing an exhibition called Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power. On the back, if you take it, you can get a discount. There are cards back there. You need to show up in droves. This is the first time they've ever done anything like this. When it opens in March, that means Black history just keeps going. Charles White will be up at LACMA. Betty R is coming later in the month, later in the year. The John Riddle exhibit opens in June. It's Black Year in Art in Los Angeles. So we just get to keep celebrating all year long. I thank you so much, and I bless you every day for making sure that you are the voice that keeps our history spoken and strong.